we owe a debt of gratitude to those who have gone before us. I've been in many countries where I couldn't do what I'm about to do today. Well, I could do it, but it would end badly. And we owe a debt of gratitude for those whose shoulders we stand on, and I think the best way that we can honor their sacrifice is to live out our faith in public and to share the truth that we have to help liberate people, not just on the outside that we live in a free country, but you can live in a free country and be bound on the inside. And the gospel changes the hearts of people. So I thank you for the opportunity to share that. As today we go through and continue our series, the second week on identity. And this is the biggest question that you and I have to ask, and that is, who are we? Who am I, and how should I live in response to the answer to that question? How should I find success? How should I make the choices that I need to make in my life? What is the best way to live out the years that I have on this planet? It all comes down starting from the foundation of identity. We ask the question, what is it? And then what is the significance of it? What does it mean to me? And so last week we used the example of a child's drawing. How many of you have ever received a drawing from a child? Yeah, and so the first thing you have to figure out is what? Yeah, what is it? So you're asking the question, what is it? You may not ask it like that. You say, tell me about this, and so it lessens the blow. In essence, what you're saying is, this is so horrible, I can't even figure out what this is. You don't want to say that, but that's kind of what you're saying. So it's bad art, but you put it on the fridge because of the relationship that you have. It's significant to you out of that relationship. And so last week we learned that essence precedes existence, that anything that is created starts in the mind of the Creator and then comes out in an essential property. Essential properties is what it is. And so when we ask ourselves, what are we? Who am I? Or what am I? We have to answer the question, what are my essential properties? The things that I can't not be. Those are the most important answers and questions that we could ask, because we will live up to how we see ourselves. And there is a battle over the idea of identity today in our culture. And so today, the foundation is laid in Genesis chapter 1. So why don't you go ahead and turn there. Genesis chapter 1. You don't even have to look to the table of contents to find it. Just go to the table of contents and turn right, and it will appear. Genesis chapter 1 helps us understand the foundation of who we are and the answer to the question, what am I, who am I, and what can't I not be? How can I not stop being this? And God said, verse 24, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, and then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Now, notice this in verse 26. It says, let us. Who's us? Yeah, the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. You see an inter-Trinitarian dialogue here between the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. So right at the very beginning, Genesis chapter 1, we see that ultimate reality, God, from all eternity, is in unity and diversity, perfect love in community. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Now this is important because we could say, why did God make us? Have you ever had that conversation with your child? Usually it's after you ask them to do a chore. And they say, why do I have to do this? And you say, because I'm the parent. And then they say, well, I didn't ask you to have me. That ever happen? I didn't ask you. This is your choice. Okay, we didn't ask God to create us. Why did He? It wasn't because He was lonely and He was bored. It's because what He had within the Trinity was so awesome and so powerful and so wonderful, He wanted to share it. So you and I were born, as someone said, out of the laughter and the mirth of the Trinity. Verse 27, so God created man in His own image. Everybody say His own image. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with the seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, and everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning on the sixth day. God, help us to understand who we are, and help us to be great bearers of the image that you've placed in us. In Jesus' name, amen. What does it mean? You were made in God's image. And this is a big fundamental question that has multi-layers of answers that we'll kind of uncover as the series goes forward. But first of all, we have to look at how in ancient Near Eastern history, anybody that would rule an area would often create images of themselves and place them in the outer regions of their rule. So that people would never get a glimpse of the emperor, but they would get a glimpse of the image, and that image would declare, the emperor rules here. That's why they would often put their image on a coin. So you remember the account, Jesus, people are asking, hey, should we pay taxes or not? And wouldn't it be nice if Jesus said, no, don't pay taxes? No, but he didn't say that. He said, bring me a coin. And the question was, whose image is on the coin? Whose image was on the coin? Yeah, Caesar. So render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Now, what if he would have turned and asked, whose image is on you? Render unto God that which is God's. And that's worship. You see, they had emperor worship. Pay taxes to the emperor, but don't worship the emperor. You worship the one whose image is on you. And so what God has done, instead of creating statues for the planet to show that he rules this planet, what he has done is that he created you. And he created you as his living image bearers so that wherever you go, you are a testament to the rule of the living God. That is the primary role of humanity. To bear the image of God and to manifest the kingdom of God and the rule of God wherever we go. And wherever we fall short of that, we're missing what God has called us to do and be. And so, if someone were to ask you, and sometimes it's your parent, who do you think you are? You ever heard that? Who do you think you are? Here's how I want you to answer. I am a special creation made in the image of Almighty God. Okay, so let's practice that. Who do you think you are? I'm a special creation made in the image of the living God, or Almighty God. Say it again. Who do you think you are? Made in the image of God. That's who I am. Now, that may sound haughty and arrogant, but really it's humbling. Because it doesn't come just with status, it comes with responsibility. There are, however, voices in our culture that are very strong that would say otherwise. And often it is their goal to not get you to understand that you're made in the image of God, but you're the result of accidental chance processes over millions of years, and then this is who you are at this moment. Really the product, not of a mindful God, but the product of accidental chance processes, and basically a bunch of mistakes kind of got you here. And so this is what is indoctrinated into the public school students and so much of this generation and high school biology classes, college biology classes, that this is who you are. We say, who am I? The answer isn't, I'm an image bearer made in the image of the living God. But I guess I just kind of arrived here over a lot of time and mistakes. And so subconsciously are we saying to them that really you don't matter. In the scheme of things, you don't matter. In fact, it's arrogant for you to think that you actually matter and that you have any kind of significance. But you see, significance comes out of relationship. It's why the kid's picture is significant. It's not because he's a prodigy Rembrandt. It's because you have a relationship with that person. But when asking, do I matter? To what relationship? To relationship to accidental chance processes? It's hard to have a relationship with that. These voices seem to be getting a little louder because I think as science has progressed, you're getting more and more evidence that that theory actually doesn't work very well. And we'll unpack that a little bit. Lawrence Krauss, who is a professor at the University of Arizona, wrote a best-selling book, The Universe from Nothing. Why is there something rather than nothing? That's a great question. Everybody asks that question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Well, he aims to answer that. And here's what he says about you. The amazing thing is that every atom in your body came from a star that exploded. It really is the most poetic thing I know about physics. These physicists need to get lives, you know what I mean? So he says, you are all stardust. You couldn't be here if the stars hadn't exploded because the elements, the carbon, the nitrogen, the oxygen, the iron, and all the things that matter for evolution weren't created at the beginning of time. They were created in the nuclear furnaces of stars, and the only way they could get into your body is if those stars were kind enough to explode. So forget Jesus, the stars died so that you could be here today. That's what you are. You're carbon, you're hydrogen, you're nitrogen. This is the essence of who you are. Don't think you're anything grander than that. You're not. Stephen Novella, a medical doctor, he wrote a book called The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. I love the subtitle, How to Know What is Really Real in a World Increasingly Full of Fake. So he's the authority on ultimate reality, and here's what he says about evolution. However, it is important not to miss the bigger point. Even if evolutionary theory were of no practical use outside of understanding our origins, and parenthetically he says this is not the case, but just as a hypothetical, teaching evolution is a struggle worth fighting. This is about the larger struggle between the Enlightenment, science, and reason on one side, and tribalism, partisanship, superstition, and often greed on the other. Watch now his last sentence. I do believe it is a struggle for the very essence of humanity and civilization. Remember, your essential qualities are what you can't not be. And so what he's saying is that evolution is a fight for the very essence of who you are as a human being. And I think to a large degree he's right. There's a book out now, it's an international bestseller. It's called Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. So it's one of the leading authorities about the definition of who you are as a human. It's a longer quote, but I want you to see what he has to say. According to the science of biology, people were not created, they have evolved. And certainly did not evolve to be equal. The idea of equality is inextricably intertwined with the idea of creation. The Americans got the idea of equality from Christianity, which argues that every person has a divinely created soul and that all souls are created equal before God. However, if I do not believe in the Christian myths about God, creation, and souls, what does it mean that all people are equal? Evolution is based on difference, not equality. Every person carries a somewhat different genetic code and is exposed from birth to different environmental influences. This leads to the development of different qualities that carry with them different chances of survival. Created equal should therefore be translated into evolved differently. So imagine the Declaration of Independence. Was it Jefferson who wrote that? These things we hold to be self-evident. All men have evolved differently. It doesn't have the same ring, does it? Doesn't. Let's found a nation on that. He says, just as people were never created, neither, according to the science of biology, is there a creator who endows them with anything. You don't have an image of the living God. There's only blind evolutionary processes devoid of any purpose leading to the birth of individuals. So endowed by their creator should be translated into simply being born. What am I? Well, you're born. Anything further than that? No, you're just part of a long evolutionary chain. And this is your moment in the sun. Now, I understand that in an audience like this, that it's kind of divided into a couple groups. One group, for years, you looked at the theory of evolution, and right at the beginning, you thought, that's a dumb idea. That's just dumb. I don't need a PhD in biology to say that doesn't work. Anybody here, you say, yeah, it's never been. However, there's a lot of people who enjoy the natural sciences and who enjoy this and take some authority out of science and enjoy that aspect that when they studied it, it is a struggle. It's something that has to be looked at. And what's it say? What is true? Is evolution true in that sense? Or is the Bible, are we image bearers? How does that all work? And I recognize that there are a lot of nuances in between that, and there's theistic evolution, which is like a man with no country. But what I want to address today is not microbial evolution like bacteria developing a resistance, because we see that happening. And not speciation, because we've seen speciation. I mean, just look what we've done to dogs as people, right? So imagine the first human being encounters this wolf as this majestic animal, and the wolf says, let's be friends. And then all of a sudden, a few years down the road, it's a pug. We did that to the poor wolf. It's a chihuahua now, right? What's wrong with us? Yeah, so I know the difference. It's troubling what we've done. We're supposed to be stewards of creation, not harming it. So anyway, that's another sermon for another day, what we've done to dogs. But we can see these different breeds and these different things. That's what we've done. So there's enough room in the genetic code to create different looking kinds of things. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the idea that life started in some primordial pond at some point. Naturally, it didn't need God's help. And then through the process of evolution, mutations, and natural selection, it became us. I'm talking about that theory. And what I want to see is this is a stronghold that, if believed, it makes it a shorter walk to thinking that I don't matter and that God doesn't exist. It's not often a one-to-one correlation, but sometimes it is. And when somebody is asking, who am I? And they're told that you're just a result of millions of years of mistakes, and you're going to be here, and then you're going to be gone, and your life is really not that significant, that plays on a person. And we live up to how we see each other. So you may think, I've never believed that. That's dumb. But I guarantee you this, that you have people in your life, kids and grandkids, that are going to be struggling and processing through this. And they need to see, not just some wild-haired fundamentalist preacher saying, that's just not right. But they need to see something beyond that, some substance. And so what we're going to do is try to open the door a little bit, and I'm trying to condense some very powerful evidence that shows that you are created, and all the diversity of life around us has God's fingerprint as well. So you ready to go on this journey? All right, so page 1. I would call it flaw number 1 in the theory of evolution, and that is it fails to explain the origin of the mind. The origin of the mind. Now, how many of you have minds? Okay. How many are wondering if you have a mind? Okay. Well, listen, I have good news for you. You were wondering with your mind, right? So even if you're wondering, you have a mind. That's proof of that. So if you leave with just that wondrous revelation, it's awesome. But your mind is not a material part of you. It is an immaterial part of you. You're part of the image of God is that you are material and immaterial. So you are made of the stardust stuff plus the immaterial aspect of your mind. Now, 2 questions as it relates to evolution. If an immaterial process, or if a material process, a natural process that simply deals with the chemistry, arrived at your immaterial mind through a series of mistakes, how do you know your thinking is not mistaken? In other words, if mistakes got you here, how do you know you're thinking? How can you trust your thoughts even? This is a problem that Darwin had way back when he was thinking of his theory, because he thought, man, if we came from apes, how do I know I don't have an ape brain and my thoughts aren't just the musings of a bewildered ape? You don't know that. So philosophically, we already have a process, already have a problem. Mindless processes don't create minds. It's a bad cause and effect connection. Secondly, the immaterial part of who you are supervenes over the material part of who you are. In other words, it has power over it. It is greater than the material part of you. How do I know? Everybody raise your hand. Okay, you chose to do that. I didn't say put them down. You chose to do that too. Now, your hand does not have a mind. But your mind controlled your hand. Your hand is just physical. It's just meat. But your brain and your mind interacted that said, raise that hand. So the immaterial is greater. It rises above the material. Now watch. If the evolutionary process is bound by physical constraints, It only can do what nature tells it to do. It's material. There's no way it can reach above to create something immaterial that will be over and above the material. It can't. It can't rise above the chemistry to create something that's not chemical. And so we could just stop right there. But you're fortunate today. We're going to keep going. We have only 47 more points to go. Did you pack a lunch? I ate before I came. Okay, let's look at number 2. Number 2 issue with evolution. What's the next slide? And that is the origin of first life. Technically, if you're in a debate about evolution, they don't want to debate this. They say, well, the origin of life and the evolution of life are two different things. Well, really why they don't want to debate it is because they have no good arguments here. And so they just want to they want to assume this happened and then just move on about the evolution. But if you read textbooks having to do with the origin of life, they often borrow evolutionary language. Like, well, we created this protocell and then it mutated and then nature selected. It borrows the language of evolution, but they don't want to talk about it in the dialogue of evolution. But since I'm in charge of this sermon, we're going to talk about it. Because God claims to be the author of life. And about 60 years ago, the origin of life sciences really started to launch with the Miller-Urey experiments that are in all the high school textbooks that talks about the methane and ammonia and the sparks, and then these chemicals came into this trap, and we found that, wow, there's some primitive, simple amino acids and some simple life building blocks just out of this apparatus, and that proves that life could have really formed, or it intimates strongly that life could have formed naturally. And then since then, they've been trying to do these experiments over and over and over and trying to get more and more. In fact, I just read a NASA headline a couple weeks ago that said NASA has created an experiment that shows that life could have formed in these deep sea vents, when really it was nothing. If you read the article, you see it's nothing of the sort. But to the uninitiated, because they never tell you the rest of the story, and there's no footnotes in textbooks, so you can't go back to the original research, when you read the rest of the story, you see that life is far more complex than Darwin had ever thought it would be. And these life chemicals, we need 4 kinds of molecules to create life. We need lipids, those are fats. We need carbohydrates, we need fuel. We need proteins, that's the structure, your hair and fingernails and all the machinery in your body. And we need DNA, we need the code that tells it all what to do and what to be. So you need all 4 of those molecules all operating at once. The problem is getting one of those molecules is exceedingly impossible by natural process. What does it take to create the simplest life? You need 1,600 gene products. These are products of the DNA that create the protein structures. And so I have one of my child's toys that Pastor Nate destroyed earlier today. I'm going to see if I can put it back together. And it kind of resembles a protein fold. Because the proteins in your body are chains. They're chains of amino acids. And there are 20 amino acids in nature. How many? 20. And in order to get the right protein, first it starts in the primary structure of the chain. It's like writing a sentence. You need the amino acids in the right order in the chain. And this happens inside of a cell called a ribosome, is the one that puts this chain together in the right order. And then it folds. It folds into different levels of structure, and then different protein folds will come together to create a specific structure that will fit hand in glove as the machine, as the enzyme or whatever it's supposed to catalyze. It fits perfectly in that situation. The simplest life forms have between, I think, would we say 1,300 and 1,500 of these. And they have to be ordered. Now, Hubert Yockey, who's a biophysicist, he calculated the odds of one of these coming together of about, I think it was maybe 150 amino acids long. And he said the odds are 1 times 10 to the 75th power. So that's one chance in 1 with the 75 zeros behind it. Well, we call that impossible. That's a big number. for just one of these proteins to come together, because you have to multiply probabilities. The first, okay, do I get the right letter? I get to choose 1 out of 20 letters. Does lysine go here? Histidine go here? What goes next? And if they're not in the right order, it doesn't fold properly. So every slot, I get a 1 out of 20 chance. Then the next one's 1 out of 20, 1 out of 20, 1 out of 20. Then you multiply that by the hundreds in the line. And you see that if there's a few out of order, it breaks. It doesn't fold well. Now multiply that times the hundreds you need just for a simple cell work. And now you're starting to see the immensity of the problem. You see, the other aspect is that the reactions that create the proteins destroy the nucleotides and destroy the carbohydrates and destroy the lipids. And the reactions that create the lipids are created in the wrong pH for the proteins to form. So these different molecules that you need, they don't all play nice together. The only time they play nice together is when they're in a living cell. But you begin to break that apart, and now it begins to degenerate. In fact, they call it the caramelization problem. Have you ever sauteed onions? You're caramelizing them. It begins to break down. And these reactions, as they're trying them in a lab, they need to freeze them. Otherwise, they'll continue to go forward and they'll caramelize. In fact, one scientist says it makes asphalt. Next slide. Dean Kenyon, he was the leading origin of life scientist in the 60s and 70s. And he literally wrote the book he called Biochemical Predestination. And in his mind, the idea was that these chemicals they work together so well that if we just get them near each other, they will form life. And then one of his students challenged him on this paradox, we call it a chicken and egg paradox. Which came first? We need the DNA instructions, we need the recipe, and then we also need the cake batter. So we need the proteins and we need the DNA. But we can't have one without the other, because DNA is replicated using the proteins, and proteins are built using the DNA. We need them both at the exact same time. And that got him thinking about this until a few years down the road, he repudiated his entire textbook. And he said that this doesn't work. There's no way chemicals can predestine life. And it cost him a lot. And eventually he found God. He's a follower of Christ today. So you know that when the guy who writes the textbook on biochemical predestination, when he says, yeah, that's dumb. You should listen to a guy like that, because he's lost a lot. It cost him a lot. But he was willing to go where the evidence led him. And then you see another scientist who's really kind of rising to the fore these days. His name is James Tour, and he's one of the leading synthetic chemists in the world. A synthetic chemist is somebody who makes nanomolecules. He makes them in a lab. So this is what he does for a living at Rice University. And he works with graphene, and he works with these little nanocars, because bacteria have developed a resistance to antibiotics. And so he's developed these little nanocars with little bayonets on the front that will drive into the bacteria and poke a hole in it and kill the cells. And now he's making them so they do the right cells. They kill the right cells, which is handy. And so this is his work. This is his life's work. There'll be 50,000 of these nanocars that would fit across the span of your hair. That's how small they are. So if anyone knows how to make molecules, it's this guy. And now he's going around and he's sharing that the origin of life scientists are being deceptive about how far they really have come. In fact, he says their research is like making a proto-turkey. He says origin of life researchers, their protocol assembly is akin to buying 20 pounds of sliced turkey meat, adding a gallon of turkey broth, warming it, sticking in a few feathers, and suggesting that a live turkey will eventually come gobbling out if given enough time, or that a proto-turkey or extant turkey has been synthesized. And so when you see, hey, NASA's created this, or the textbook says, yes, most biologists believe life formed in this little pool. Now what they're imagining, and what they're wanting you to believe is that if you put enough turkey meat together and a couple feathers, given enough time, a turkey will come out. Now what will happen to that turkey meat in reality? It will stink up your house. Exactly. And that's what happens even in the biochemical world. It caramelizes. It begins to degenerate. It doesn't. The trend isn't toward life. It's toward death. All right, number 3. Next slide. Irreducible complexity. About 20 years ago, there was a biochemist from Lehigh University named Michael Behe. Actually, he's still there. But he wrote a famous book called Darwin's Black Box. In that, he realized in his research that as he's uncovering a lot of these systems in life at a very small level, he's realizing that Darwinian processes of small successive changes could not account for what we see here. Because these systems need all the parts all at one time. You can't reduce them anymore or they break. And if they break, they don't give you any functional advantage to pass on to your offspring. So the Darwinian process is very suspect here. And we have this Darwinian process. Now he's thinking, I don't know. And his poster child is the bacterial flagellum. And that is on the back of an E. coli bacteria is this flagellum. And as he studied it, he saw that, man, this isn't simple. This is complex. What he noticed is that it's an outboard motor with bushings and bearings and rotors and stators and a propeller, all of which needed to be there. And not only is it an outboard motor, but it's a better outboard motor than anything he had ever seen humans make. It rotates at 100,000 RPMs. And it can change the opposite rotation in a quarter of a turn. So it'll go 100,000 RPMs this way, and before it turns a quarter of the way, it will switch and go 100,000 RPMs the other way. Now, I challenge you. Get in your parents' car. And I want you to drive it. You don't have to be going fast, maybe just 25 miles an hour. And then take that lever and shove it into reverse. In the name of science, of course. Now, you won't be doing maybe 2,000, 2,500 RPMs. Not 100,000 RPMs. What do you think will happen? Yeah, it won't be a happy place. And yet in this little bacteria, it's got a better motor and transmission than the one that's in our car that we've developed over the years. This motor propels this bacteria 20 body lengths a second. Now, for a bacteria, that doesn't seem like a lot to us, but if you were to scale it, it would be like this. So the world record 100-meter swim, about 47 seconds. Think of swimming a football field in about 47 seconds. If you could swim as fast as this bacteria goes to scale, you would do it under 3 seconds. That's how fast it is. And Behe looked at these machines, and he said, if I look at an outboard motor and think it's created, how could I not look at something that's even more complex and say that it evolved? Because Darwinian slow processes tell us that can't happen. It has to be there all at once. Thinking of this other machine, brilliant robot that the University of South Florida engineers created. It's called the Tavros 2. And it's a solar-powered robot, self-contained with its computer brain, and it can go into the depths of the ocean, and it can take samples, and it can send data back, and when it needs a recharge, it knows when to surface, and it will surface and get the recharge and go back to doing the data. It's even got a program in it that sends tweets out to its Twitter account, so you could follow the robot on Twitter. Amazing. It's an amazing robot. But if you compare it to something that's actually living, it's not that great. Now, we could compare it to something amazing like a dolphin or an orca, but Doug Axe, who's a biochemist, he said, let's not do that. Let's compare it to something really simple like cyanobacteria. Now, cyanobacteria sounds fancy, but you all know it as the little bacteria that lives in water, and it creates these floating mats of kind of green goop. And, we know it as pond scum. So he said, let's not compare it to anything massive. Let's compare it to pond scum. And so you take that little cyanobacteria, it's also solar powered. And it has a very efficient solar collector. It doesn't need one the size of a coffee table. In fact, it's a trillionth time smaller than the one in the robot. And it didn't need to be assembled by a bunch of engineers. It made it itself. And so this solar collector in the cyanobacteria, it needs about 417 very small parts and machinery in order for it to process sunlight, air, and water, and out of it comes sugar. Wouldn't you like to make sugar out of sunlight, air, and water? And then he uses that sugar, it's not a he, it uses that sugar to then power the rest of the machine. And this solar collector, cyanobacteria, they don't have a Twitter account, but they are able to communicate in some way with all the trillions of other bacteria that form the mat of the pond scum, and it coordinates a movement so that it will move the whole mat into the sun. And it will arrange it to wherever the sun travels. So it's communicating with trillions of other bacteria. And then, have you ever just got 5 people to do something together? It's getting trillions of these bacteria just to accomplish a coordinated effort so that they can get the food and process all that. So the solar collector is still better in the cyanobacteria. Let's look at the manufacturing capability. So can the robot make anything? No, it just sends information. It collects information and it sends it, but it doesn't really manufacture anything. But you look at the cyanobacteria, and it has an entire section designed as a factory. Because it has to make all of these 417 parts. It can't just go to the part shop and get them. It makes them all in-house. So it has a tiny machine shop inside the bacteria that makes all of these parts and assembles the machines to process the solar energy and the respiration and the motion and everything else that it does in there. It has its own machine shop. But then, not just a machine shop to process what it's doing internally, it has a machine shop to make other bacteria. So wouldn't it be amazing if the robot, just every few seconds, made another robot as good or better than the one? It doesn't do that. But these little bacteria have all of this irreducibly complex machinery in it. So I have this imaginary scenario where there's a contest. And the contest is, we're going to take humanity's best technology and compare it to what God can do. And so we get our millions of dollars of research grant dollars to the University of South Florida and all the brilliant brains and the brilliant engineers, and they get together with their solar panels and their machine shops and all of their computer programmers, and they get together this robot and they bring it to this contest. They say, look at this. And God looks at that, and the angels are saying, what are you going to do? What are you going to bring to the table for comparison? Are you going to bring maybe a dolphin or a blue whale? And God says, no, I don't think I need to do that. Just bring the pond scum. And the pond scum wins. Because it's irreducibly complex on multiple levels. And there's no scenario in which Darwinian evolution can explain how all that machinery gets there all at once to work. And not just to process solar energy, but to make other pond scums. Well, Pastor, what about mutations and natural selection? How does that work? Can't you start with something small and then just add smaller parts and do that? And it was an interesting theory a couple 100 years ago. 150 years ago, it was interesting. But the more that we've seen how the process works and the limits of that process, and then you start to read Genesis again and you see that God designed things to breed according to their kind, according to, if you want to use the taxonomic category, according to their family groups, and that there are limits, that if you try to push beyond those limits using mutation and natural selection, it doesn't help, it harms. And so are mutations the hero of the plot? No, they're not. They can't account for the increasing complexity of life. Darwinian natural selection can give you a good explanation for the survival of the fittest, but it can't explain the arrival of the fittest. It can help you understand how things ebb and flow inside an environment to maximize their life potential in those environments, like what we've done to the dogs. Poor wolves. But it can't explain how the dog got there in the first place or how a cow became a whale. Because that takes big macro changes. I mean, I hardly believe that we can turn a wolf into Chihuahua. I can't believe we can do that. I can't believe we would do that. But we see that there's a lot of plasticity within the genome to fill those niches. God's into life in all these different areas. But at the end of the day, there's limits to that. And if you have to carry your dog in a purse, you've gone too far. You've gone too far. If you have to swat away the hawks and owls while it's out going to the bathroom, you've gone a little too far. But mutations are not the hero of the plot. What's a mutation? A mutation is a mistake in the copying of the genetic code. It's taking the recipe on the box and it's scrambling the letters and then trying to follow that new recipe to create the new cake. Well, you do that biologically, and there's some very small limits that you're playing with there. And what happens most often is that mutations are harmful or neutral. If you take your eye, for instance, your eye has a little molecule in it called the rhodopsin molecule, which is the light-sensitive part of your eye, or one part of it. And that has 348 chains of amino acids, 348 slots. Each one has a 1 in 20 chance of being correct. Well, there are some that carry a genetic mutation that changes 4 out of the 348 amino acids. Just 4 of them. It switches them out with different ones. And it causes a hereditary blindness in a lot of people. In fact, a lot of people of Irish descent carry this mutation. Just 4, and people are going blind. So there's not, the proteins are very specific structures. How many of you would say, you know what? I don't see very well. I need corrective lenses. So I think I'll subject myself to a 1% random change of the molecules within my eye to see if that makes me see better. I don't think we would do that because random processes are not good engineers. They make good destructions of things. They destroy things. They degrade things, but they don't create things. They're not good engineers. A few years ago, there were some experiments done to see if we could mutate animals and see where that would take us. And so what they did is they took fruit flies. Don't you love fruit flies in the fall? It just comes like a migratory feast of stuff in your house. And they took these fruit flies and they took the male of the species and they fed them mutagens, so food that would mutate their offspring. And then they would breed with the females and out would come mutant fruit flies. A lot of these experiments are in the textbooks. And they found a couple things. One, the mutations were real. They would happen. In fact, we have a picture of one here. The one on your right shows legs growing out of the face of the fruit fly. Yeah, I mean, if you were the fruit fly, you'd say, hey, I want a do-over. You know what I mean? This isn't working. But here's the thing, and if I can explain this well, it's pretty recent research they found. The Nobel Prize in the early mid-90s went to these folks. Is that while an organism is developing, there's a set of regulatory networks in your genetic code. So they used to think this was junk DNA, but it's not junk, it actually matters. There are certain parts of your genetic code that code for specific proteins. Your hair and nails. But the largest part of your genetic code is the one that tells when things need to be built when. It directs the timing of when these structures are built. Anybody ever wired a house before or built a house before? Did you wire the house after the drywallers? No, you don't want to do that. That would be dumb. See, there is what's called a general contractor that says, hey, let's do the groundwork, let's lay the foundation, let's build the frame it in, and then we'll get the wiring in so the guys don't have to, but then there's drywall, and then the shingle, all that stuff. There's a timing to building stuff, where if you get that messed up, it doesn't work. And it's the same thing with living things. There's a timing to building stuff. And so they took these fruit flies, And they mutated different parts of the the regulatory network, the general contractor. And what they found is the mutations that occurred early in the embryonic development caused the biggest change of the body structure. Early mutations are strong mutations. So if I wanted to mutate something, I'd want to radiate it early in the process. And so it will create big changes. The problem was, the hope is, hey, we need big changes to make the cow a whale. You need big changes, right, to turn a car that produces milk into a submarine that gives live birth under salt water. Okay, those are big changes. Well, I want big changes, and if mutations are the hero, I want them early. But what they've done with fruit flies and now other organisms is that when they mutate them early in the development, it's almost always fatal. It creates big changes. It kills it. That's an evolutionary dead end. So early mutations are big but fatal. In fact, they call it embryonic fatal. So the mutations that happen later, you got a car at the very end of the assembly line, or a house at the very end, and you say, do I want to paint it pink or red? It's not going to change it. It'll still function. Or maybe I want to put motorcycle tires on the car. It's going to degrade the operation, but it's not going to kill the organism. That has to be done late in the assembly line process. And so the way it's designed, and this is why we have these fixed limits on species or on family orders, that the early mutations kill it. They're big but kill it. The late mutations can happen, and they don't kill it necessarily, but they degrade it, or it's not big enough to make it into a whale. Are you tracking with what I'm saying here? It's kind of complicated, but this is late research that is showing that Darwinian evolution is not working. In fact, we didn't show you the video, but there are over now 1,000 PhD scientists that have signed on to a declaration that they're skeptical of Darwinian claims of evolution. And you can go to this website, dissentfromdarwin.org. And if you're a PhD research scientist and you agree with it, you can sign. But if you're not PhD level, they won't even let you sign it. And then here's a warning on the website when you go to sign it. I just want you to know that signing this document could cost you your career. It's full disclosure. But now they have over 1,000 PhD scientists that have made a declaration that they're skeptical of Darwinian claims. Why? Because of science like this. Not because they read it in the Bible, but because the science is saying it's not good. Let's go with the next one. Zebrafish. Anybody have little aquariums? Speaking of these gene regulatory networks and how they have to build certain things in certain orders, Nikon has a contest with their microscopes where you can film stuff, and this was the winner. The winner is, what you're going to watch here is not the wiring of a house, but the wiring of a zebrafish in 16-hour time lapse of how all of these machines are wiring this fish's nervous system. It's pretty cool to see. Go ahead and fire it. Isn't that cool? Now, those of you that have ever done wiring before, how would you like this job? God shows up at your house and says, yeah, I got this little zebrafish. Wire it for me. But I want you to notice that all of those little millions of machines are wiring it without a brain. How do they know what to do? It's all pre-programmed in the genetic code and the regulatory network. Now, where did the information in the program come from? It can't come from mutations because mutations degrade information. It has to come from a divine creator. Only information comes from a mind. And this is the fifth problem, the last one I'll talk to you about. And that is the information problem of these molecules of carbohydrates, lipids, nucleotides, and proteins are all information bearing. And if you're walking along the beach and you saw a heart with an arrow through it and it said, I heart Kim, would you say, wow, that's amazing how the wind and the waves just created that? I don't think you would say that. I think you would infer that somebody did that because minds come up. But in each of your cells is a DNA code, except for your sex cells. It's just half. In all your other cells, you have the full DNA code. And they say there's about 10,000, the equivalent of 10,200 page books in your DNA. In every cell, 10,200 page books. Now, if you're walking along the beach and you see a pile of 10,200 page books, would you say, wow, that's amazing how the wind and the waves and erosion? No, you wouldn't. And here's what's cool, is that there's more to the book than the ink and the paper. That's the structure of it. But what is it about the ink that creates information that we understand? There's a code there that is an immaterial code. The information is primary, not the structure, not the ink and the paper. The information is primary. And it gives new credence to when John is writing to the ancient Greeks. In the beginning was the Word. Information is primary, not the structure. It goes all the way back to the image. Who are you? You're a special creation made in the image of God. If God can put so much glory and magnificence that we don't fully understand pond scum, how much is invested in you? How much is invested in you? You may not look in the mirror and say, oh, that's glorious. You probably look in the mirror and say, ooh, I wish that was different. I wish that was different. I wish that was different. But don't ever forget, you're a special creation made in the image of God. Let's stand.